Get away from me! The elderly man's voice cracked as the shopping cart slammed into his wheelchair, sending it skidding sideways. What are you going to do about it, old man? The teenager sneered, high-fiving his friends as laughter echoed. Through the supermarket aisle, the veteran's weathered face flushed with humiliation, his medals glinting under the fluorescent lights as he struggled to right himself. Nobody moved to help. Then the automatic doors at the entrance slid open, and a towering figure stepped inside. The laughter died instantly as the Navy SEAL's eyes locked onto the scene, his face hardening into granite as he recognized his father's wheelchair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Master Chief James Iron Morrison had survived 3 wars and 57 years on this earth. His hair, once a vibrant auburn, had faded to steel grey, matching the stubborn determination in his eyes. The wheelchair was relatively new, just 18 months, but the scars that necessitated it were ancient history, earned during Operation Desert Storm, when a landmine had left shrapnel embedded deep in his spine. For decades, he'd managed with a cane and sheer force of will, until last year when the fragments shifted, severing nerves and robbing him of the ability to stand. His broad shoulders still carried the military bearing of his 25 years. In the Marine Corps, though they now hunched slightly over the handles of his chair. His hands, once steady enough to disassemble and reassemble an M16 blindfolded, now bore the tremors of nerve damage and the mottled bruising of blood thinners. Still, there was nothing weak about James Morrison. The medals he wore today, pinned to his old service jacket for his weekly veterans' breakfast, were only a fraction of those he'd earned, including the Purple Heart and Silver Star. For decades after his injury, he'd served as a logistics officer, refusing medical discharge, fighting bureaucracy as fiercely as he'd once fought America's enemies. Now retirement filled his days in Riverdale, a mid-sized town where he'd settled to be near his only son, Michael. His weekly highlight was Thursday morning breakfast at Simmons Grocery in Delhi, where a group of local veterans gathered at the small cafe section to share coffee, memories, and the comfortable silence of those who understand war without needing words. James always arrived early to do his shopping first, navigating the aisles in his wheelchair with the tactical precision of a military operation. The store was usually quiet at 7 a.m., allowing him the dignity of managing his new limitations without an audience. The employees knew him. Mr. Morrison, always polite, never complaining, tipping his cap to the cashiers, refusing help with a gracious, "I've got it, thank you." Today was no different, or so it had seemed, until he turned into aisle 7 for his weekly can of premium coffee. The disturbance announced itself with the squeak of rubber-soled sneakers and the unmistakable cadence of teenage bravado. 3 boys, maybe 16 or 17, swaggered into the same aisle, energy drinks in hand, voices too loud for the early hour. James paid them no mind, focusing on reaching the coffee on the middle shelf, a task that required maneuvering his chair at precisely the right angle. "Dude, $5 says I can drift a shopping cart all the way down the aisle," the tallest one said, his voice carrying the artificial confidence of a boy playing at manhood. "No way. There's an old guy blocking the lane," another responded. A stocky youth with a baseball cap turned backward, James continued his careful positioning, using his good arm to brace against the shelf while reaching up with the other. The tremor in his left hand was worse today. The morning cold always aggravated it. The coffee can wobbled as his fingers closed around it. "So, work around him," the third boy chimed in, his voice dripping with the casual cruelty of youth. "It's not like he's moving fast." James heard them, but chose dignity over confrontation. He'd faced actual enemies with actual weapons. 3 disrespectful teenagers didn't register as a threat, merely an annoyance. He secured the coffee can and placed it in his basket, preparing to navigate around them and continue his shopping. That was when the first deliberate bump came, a shopping cart accidentally clipping his wheel as the tallest boy pushed past, a quiet test of boundaries. "Sorry," the boy said, insincerity evident in every syllable. His friends snickered. James nodded curtly, the disciplined response of someone who had learned to choose his battles wisely. "No harm done," he replied, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of age and authority. He turned his chair toward the end of the aisle, intent on moving on. The second collision was no accident. The boy with the backward cap pushed his cart with enough force that it struck James's wheelchair from behind, jerking him forward, nearly unseating him. His basket tipped, the carefully selected items, coffee, bread, the oatmeal cookies his son always claimed to dislike, but somehow devoured whenever he visited, spilled across the linoleum floor. "Oops," the boy said, eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovered power. "My bad." James's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of his rising anger. He'd commanded men in combat, maintained discipline under enemy fire. He would not be provoked by children. "I think you gentlemen need to move along now," he said, his tone level but carrying the unmistakable command presence of a career Marine. For a moment, it seemed to work. Something in his voice, the steel beneath the gravel, made the boys hesitate. But then the tallest one noticed the medals on his jacket, and everything shifted. "Nice pins, Grandpa," he smirked, emboldened by his friend's presence. "What are those for? Wheelchair racing?" "Show some respect," James replied, the first edge of real anger slipping into his voice as he bent awkwardly from his chair, trying to retrieve his scattered groceries. "These aren't costume jewelry." The third boy, until now content to follow his friend's lead, stepped forward and deliberately kicked a can of soup, sending it skittering down the aisle. "What's the matter? Can't reach your groceries?" Preparing. And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. James felt a flush of heat rise from his collar. Not shame. He'd never be ashamed of his service or his scars, but a deep, simmering anger. Not for himself, but for what these boys represented. A failure of teaching, of example setting, of the basic respect he and his brothers in arms had fought to protect. "I said move along," he repeated, straightening in his chair, summoning the full authority of his rank and experience. For a heartbeat, his voice and bearing cut through their arrogance. Then the moment passed, and the tall one leaned down, invading James's space, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Or what? You'll run over our toes?" The other two laughed, the sound echoing off the shelves, drawing the attention of a stock clerk at the far end of the aisle, who looked over uncertainly, but didn't approach. James met the boy's eyes calmly. "Son, I've met men who tried to kill me with more respect than you're showing right now." Something in his steady gaze made the tall boy falter, but peer pressure is a powerful thing at 17. Instead of backing down, he doubled down, giving the wheelchair a deliberate shove that sent it spinning halfway around. "Get away from me!" James's voice cracked, more from surprise than fear. The shopping cart slammed into his wheelchair again, sending it skidding sideways, one wheel catching on a display of canned goods. "What are you going to do about it, old man?" the teenager sneered, high-fiving his friends as laughter echoed through the supermarket aisle. James's weathered face flushed with humiliation, his medals glinting under the fluorescent lights as he struggled to right himself. Nobody moved to help. The stock clerk had disappeared, probably to find a manager, but too slowly to make a difference. An elderly woman at the end of the aisle turned away, perhaps out of discomfort or fear of becoming the next target. James fought to control his chair, to maintain his dignity, to find a way out of this situation that wouldn't escalate into something these foolish boys would genuinely regret. The tall one reached for the wheelchair again, his friends egging him on with whispered dares and stifled laughter. James prepared himself for another indignity, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair, his mind calculating angles of defense without causing harm. These were still just boys, after all, despite their cruelty. Then the automatic doors at the entrance slid open with a pneumatic hiss that somehow carried through the store. Heavy footsteps followed, measured and deliberate, moving with purpose toward aisle 7, as if drawn by some sixth sense. The boys, too occupied with their perceived dominance, didn't notice at first. James did. Something in the cadence of those steps was deeply familiar, though he wasn't expecting his son until later that day. A faint smile touched his lips as the footsteps grew closer. The laughter died instantly as the figure rounded the corner, and the Navy SEAL's eyes locked onto the scene, his face hardening into granite as he recognized his father's wheelchair. Lieutenant Commander Michael Morrison stood at the end of the aisle, filling the space with his presence. At 35, he carried himself with the fluid readiness of a predator, balanced on the balls of his feet despite his casual clothing. Jeans and a plain black t-shirt that did little to disguise the functional muscle of a man who had spent the last 15 years in the world's most elite fighting force. His dark hair was regulation short, his jawline shadowed with the stubble of someone recently returned from deployment. But it was his eyes that silenced the aisle, cold, assessing, taking in every detail of the scene before him with lethal clarity. The three boys froze, animal instinct warning them of danger before their conscious minds could process it. The tall one's hand still rested on James's wheelchair, suddenly feeling very conspicuous. Michael didn't rush. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply began walking toward them, his movements measured and controlled, each step deliberate on the linoleum floor. His gaze never wavered from the three teenagers, though he noted his father's position, the spilled groceries, the defensive angle of the wheelchair. Years of training had taught him to observe everything while appearing to focus on a single target. The stocky boy with the backward cap recovered first, elbowing his tall friend. "Dude," he muttered, "let's go." But it was too late for an easy exit. Michael had closed the distance, stopping precisely 3 feet away, close enough to intervene, far enough not to appear overtly threatening. He didn't look at his father yet, keeping his attention fixed on the three boys. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone had transformed the atmosphere in the aisle from one of casual cruelty to sharp, uncertain tension. The tall boy tried for bravado, lifting his chin. "What's your problem, man?" But his voice betrayed him, cracking on the last word. Michael tilted his head slightly, the only acknowledgement that he'd heard the question. His silence was more effective than any shouted threat, any puffed-up confrontation. It was the silence of someone who didn't need to prove anything, who knew exactly what he was capable of. The third boy, the follower, was already backing away, his self-preservation, instincts overriding any misplaced loyalty. "I'm out," he mumbled, abandoning his friends without a backward glance, squeezing past Michael with his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. The remaining two exchanged nervous glances, caught between pride and dawning awareness that they had severely miscalculated. The stocky one tried again, a touch of desperation in his attempt at nonchalance. "We were just messing around. No big deal." Michael took one step closer, just one. His eyes never left them, never blinked. He still hadn't spoken a single word. The tall one finally released his hold on the wheelchair, wiping his palm against his jeans as if touching it had suddenly become distasteful. "Whatever, man, we're done here anyway." He attempted to push his shopping cart forward to navigate around Michael with some semblance of dignity and tact. Michael's hand shot out, not aggressively but with startling speed, catching the edge of the cart. He didn't grip it tightly or wrench it away. He simply stopped its progress with minimal effort, a demonstration of control rather than force. His gaze shifted deliberately to the items scattered across the floor, then back to the teenagers' faces, the message clear without words. "This isn't finished." The stocky one broke first. "Come on, let's just go," he muttered, abandoning his fort entirely and backing away. After a moment's hesitation, his taller friend followed suit, both of them retreating down the aisle, their earlier swagger replaced by the stiff-backed hurry of those trying not to appear as if they're running. Away, Michael watched them go, his posture unchanged, his attention unwavering until they disappeared around the corner. Only then did he turn to his father, his expression softening instantly from granite to concern. "Dad," he said quietly, the first word he'd spoken since entering the store. "You okay?" James Morrison straightened in his wheelchair, adjusting his service jacket with dignity. "Better timing than usual, son," he replied, his voice steady despite the lingering flush on his cheeks. "Thought you weren't coming in until this afternoon." Michael knelt, beginning to gather the scattered groceries. "Got an earlier flight. Thought I'd surprise you." He glanced up, his eyes taking inventory of his father's condition with the practiced assessment of both a son and a soldier. "Those boys aren't worth your trouble," James cut him off firmly. "Or mine." Michael's jaw tightened, but he nodded, respecting his father's wishes, even as the protective instinct still hummed through his system. He continued collecting the items, placing them carefully back in the basket. "Your coffee made it through, unscathed," he noted, attempting to lighten the moment as he retrieved the can from under a shelf. James accepted it with a nod of thanks. Small mercies. He watched his son work, noting the new scar along his forearm, the slight favor he gave his right knee. Details another father might miss, but not one who had spent a lifetime reading. The language of wounds and the stories they told. "How long are you home this time?" 3 weeks, Michael replied, rising smoothly to his feet despite the knee he was favoring. "Maybe 4. Depends on how the rehab goes." He gestured vaguely at his leg, dismissing whatever injury had caused the limp as inconsequential. "Your breakfast bunch still meeting this morning?" James nodded, checking his watch. "In about 20 minutes. You're welcome to join, though it's mostly old war stories you've heard 100 times. A small smile touched Michael's face, softening. "The hard angles. Some stories are worth hearing 100 times. He positioned himself behind the wheelchair, not taking control, but ready to assist. "Finish your shopping first." "Already got what I came for," James replied, gesturing to the now refilled basket. He hesitated, then added gruffly, "Good to have you home, son." Michael squeezed his father's shoulder once, a brief moment of connection before they resumed their usual stoic companionship. "Good to be home, Dad." As they made their way toward the checkout, other shoppers stepped aside, some nodding respectfully at James's service jacket, others watching curiously as the unmistakable presence of the younger Morrison cleared a path through the morning crowd. Neither man spoke much. They never needed many words between them, but something had shifted in their shared silence, a rebalancing of roles that neither acknowledged directly. Near the front of the store, the manager intercepted them, a harried-looking woman in her 40s with an apologetic expression. "Mr. Morrison, I just heard from my stock clerk what happened. I'm so sorry. Those boys have been trouble before. I've banned them from the store. Is there anything I can do?" James shook his head. "No harm done in the end, Helen, but you might want to have a word with whoever's raising those 3 about respect." She nodded earnestly. "Already calling their parents after I check you out. Your groceries are on the house today." "That's not necessary," James began, his pride bristling. "I insist," she cut him off, with the authority of someone who ran her domain as definitively as he had once commanded his unit. "And thank you for your service to both of you." she added, glancing between father and son with genuine appreciation. As they exited the store, the morning sun had fully risen, bathing the parking lot in golden light. Michael loaded the groceries into his father's adapted van, but made no move to take the keys. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and James's independence was one line neither of them would cross unless absolutely necessary. "The deli next?" Michael asked, folding the receipt into his pocket. James nodded, checking his watch again. "Should be right on time." As they pulled out of the parking lot, neither noticed the three teenagers watching from behind the recycling bins, their earlier bravado replaced by subdued reflection as they observed the two men, one in a wheelchair adorned with medals of valor, the other moving with the controlled power of someone who had earned his strength through service rather than posturing. "Dude," the stocky one muttered. "I think that was Mike Morrison." The tall one frowned. "Who?" "Navy SEAL. My brother's in the Navy. Said that guy's like a legend or something. Went through Buddy-S with a broken hand, never quit, did some classified stuff overseas. Really heavy stuff." "How do you know it's him?" "The name tag on the old guy's jacket said Morrison, and my brother showed me a picture once from some ceremony. That was definitely him." The third boy, who had been quiet until now, shook his head slowly. "So we just harassed a decorated veteran in front of his Navy SEAL son?" "Yeah," the tall one said, his voice hollow with belated realization. "I guess we did." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their actions settling over them like a physical thing. "My dad's going to kill me when the store calls," the stocky one finally said. "Good," replied the third boy unexpectedly. "Maybe he should." Simmons Grocery and Deli occupied the center of Riverdale's main street, a family-owned establishment that had weathered chain store competition through quality and community connection. The deli section, separated from the grocery by a half wall of exposed brick, consisted of 8 tables, a small counter, and a glass case displaying the day's offerings. Every Thursday at 7:30 a.m., the back corner transformed into an unofficial Veterans Hall as men and women from different eras of service gathered for coffee, breakfast, and the unspoken therapy of shared experience. Today, 6 veterans were already seated at the pushed-together tables when James wheeled in, Michael following a step behind. Conversations paused as the group registered the newcomers, not from the arrival of James, a fixture of these gatherings, but from the unexpected presence of his son. "Well, I'll be damned," said Frank Delgado, a former Army Ranger with a prosthetic leg and a perpetual toothpick between his teeth. "The prodigal SEAL returns." A round of greetings followed as the group made room at the table. These were men, and one woman who had known Michael since he was a determined teenager with dreams of following in his father's military footsteps, though he'd chosen the Navy instead of the Marines, a choice that had sparked good-natured rivalry between father and son for years. "How long you stateside this time, Commander?" asked Eleanor Wright, who had served as a combat medic in Afghanistan and now ran the local VA office. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her observant eyes missing nothing, as they flickered between Michael and James. "Few weeks," Michael replied, settling into a chair as a waitress automatically brought coffee for both Morrisons. "Between assignments." The veterans nodded, understanding the deliberate vagueness. Some missions remained classified, even among those who shared the brotherhood of service. What mattered was that he was here, whole, if somewhat battered. Another rotation completed. The conversation shifted to safer topics, local politics, fishing prospects at the lake outside town, complaints about the VA paperwork Eleanor was helping them navigate. James gradually relaxed into the familiar rhythm, the earlier incident at the grocery store fading as he found himself in the company of those who saw his wheelchair as incidental, not defining. It was during a lull in conversation, as plates of eggs and toast were being distributed that the bell above the deli door chimed. The three teenagers from the grocery store entered, their earlier swagger noticeably diminished, movements hesitant as they scanned the room. The tall one led the way, followed by his two companions, all three looking uncomfortable in the unfamiliar territory of a local establishment they'd normally bypass for chain restaurants. Michael noticed them first, his posture subtly shifting, not tensing but recalibrating, a predator registering potential threats in his vicinity. James followed his son's gaze, his expression hardening as he recognized the boys. The other veterans, attuned to the sudden change in atmosphere, turned toward the door, 6 sets of eyes tracking the newcomers with the instinctive wariness of those who had learned vigilance the hard way. The teenagers faltered under the collective scrutiny, clearly reconsidering whatever had brought them here. The tall one, however, squared his shoulders with visible effort and approached the veteran's table, his friends hanging back uncertainly. Michael rose smoothly to his feet, positioning himself between the approaching boy and his father, without appearing overtly protective. He didn't speak, simply waited, his silence creating a space the teenager would have to fill. The boy stopped, a respectful distance away, swallowing hard. Up close, he looked younger than he had in the grocery store, 17 at most, with the lanky, unfinished look of someone still growing into his frame. His confidence, so cutting earlier, had evaporated, leaving naked discomfort in its place. He began, then stopped, glancing back at his friends for support. They offered none, their gazes fixed on the floor, the wall, anywhere but the table of veterans. He turned back, squaring his shoulders again. I came to apologize to Mr. Morrison for what happened at the store. The veterans exchanged glances. Rank raised an eyebrow at James, silently asking what this was about, but James kept his attention on the boy, his expression unreadable. Michael remained standing, his presence a silent barrier between the teenager and his father. Not threatening, but unmistakably protective. I was out of line, the boy continued, words tumbling faster now as if afraid he'd lose his nerve. What we did, it was disrespectful and wrong. I'm sorry. James studied him for a long moment, noting the flush creeping up the boy's neck, the way his hands fidgeted at his sides. Finally he nodded once, apology noted, not accepted, not yet, but acknowledged. The distinction wasn't lost on anyone at the table. The boy hesitated, clearly hoping for more, but unsure how to proceed. My grandfather was in Vietnam, he offered awkwardly. 101st Airborne. He died before I was born, but my mom has his medals framed at home. James's expression softened slightly. The Screaming Eagles. Good outfit. Yeah, the boy nodded, seizing on this small connection. That's what my mom always says. He paused, then added with painful honesty, he would have been ashamed of what I did today. Something in the rawness of this admission reached James. He'd seen enough young men in his career to recognize genuine remorse versus expedient contrition. This boy, for all his earlier cruelty, seemed to be experiencing the former. What's your name, son? James asked, his voice gruff but no longer cold. Tyler Wilson, sir. Well, Tyler Wilson, seems to me you've got some making up to do. Tyler nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Anything. James exchanged a glance with Michael, who gave an almost imperceptible nod and returned to his seat, though his attention remained fixed on the interaction. The VA hospital on Westridge Drive, James said, turning back to Tyler. They're always short on volunteers. Saturdays they run a program helping veterans get outside, push wheelchairs in the garden, play chess, that sort of thing. Tyler looked momentarily surprised, then nodded with growing determination. I can do that, we all can, he added, gesturing to his friends, who looked less enthusiastic but didn't object. 8 a.m. this Saturday, James said. Ask for Eleanor Wright. He nodded toward Eleanor, who raised an eyebrow, but played along. I'll put you boys to work, she promised, her tone suggesting it wouldn't be easy duty. We'll be there, Tyler. promised. He hesitated, then extended his hand toward James. "Thank you, sir, for the second chance." James regarded the offered hand for a moment, then accepted it, his grip firm despite the tremor. "Don't waste it." Tyler nodded, relief washing over his features. He retreated to his friends, and the three of them made a hasty exit, the bell chiming their departure. As the door closed behind them, Frank let out a low whistle. "Want to fill us in on what that was all about, Iron?" James shrugged, returning to his cooling breakfast. "Just some kids learning a lesson. They gave my dad trouble at the grocery store," Michael elaborated, his voice controlled, but with an undercurrent of still simmering anger. "Thought it would be fun to mess with a man in a wheelchair." A ripple of disgust passed through the group. "Seems like they thought wrong," observed Sam Ramirez, a former Marine who had served under James decades ago and still addressed him as Gunny out of ingrained habit. "They didn't know what they were doing," James said, surprising the table with his lenience. "All the more reason to teach them," Eleanor replied firmly. "Don't worry, I'll make sure they understand the cost of the freedom they take for granted when they show up Saturday." Her smile was sweet, but held the steel that had carried her through 2 tours in combat zones. "If they show up, they'll show," Michael said with quiet certainty. Something in his tone suggested he would ensure it personally if necessary. The conversation gradually shifted to other topics, but a new current ran beneath the usual banter. The veterans watched James with subtle concern, noting the way he occasionally rubbed his left arm, where the wheelchair had been shoved, the slight tightness around his eyes that suggested pain he wouldn't acknowledge. Michael noticed, too, his gaze repeatedly returning to his father, assessing, cataloguing. The protective instinct that had served him through multiple combat deployments was now focused entirely on the man who had once protected him, the role reversal still new territory for both of them. As breakfast concluded and the group began to disperse, Eleanor touched James's shoulder lightly. "Need a ride home? I'm headed that direction." James shook his head. "Michael's with me." "Actually," Michael interjected smoothly, "I need to stop by the hardware store. Dad, why don't you let Eleanor take you home, and I'll meet you there in an hour or so." James narrowed his eyes at his son, recognizing the deflection but unable to immediately identify its purpose. "The hardware store." "Faucet in your guest bathroom is leaking," Michael replied easily. "Thought I'd fix it while I'm home." It wasn't a lie. The faucet had been dripping for months, but it wasn't the whole truth either. James knew his son well enough to recognize when he was being managed, but after years of command, he also knew when to pick his battles. "Fine," he conceded, turning to Eleanor, "if you don't mind the company." "Wouldn't have offered if I did," she replied briskly, already moving to help gather his things. As Eleanor helped James navigate toward her car, Michael hung back, exchanging quiet words with Frank and Sam. The 3 men spoke briefly, their expressions serious, before clasping hands and separating. Whatever had been discussed, it was clear an understanding had been reached. Michael watched his father's departure, his face settling into the composed mask he wore on operations, focused, determined, emotions carefully regulated. Only when the car had pulled away did he turn and walk purposefully in the opposite direction, not toward the hardware store, but back toward the center of town. The hardware store could wait. He had other business to attend to first. Riverdale. High School occupied a sprawling campus on the north side of town, its brick buildings and athletic fields a hub of community activity. The morning bell had just rung when Michael arrived, parking his rental car in the visitor's lot and approaching the main entrance with the measured pace of someone with a clear objective. The school's security guard, a retired sheriff's deputy, named Collins, straightened instinctively as Michael approached, recognizing military bearing when he saw it. "Can I help you, sir?" "Need to speak with Principal Delaney," Michael replied, his tone pleasant but brooking no argument. "Regarding Tyler Wilson and two other students. It's important. Collins studied him for a moment, then nodded, something in Michael's demeanor conveying both authority and legitimacy. Sign in here. I'll call ahead. 5 minutes later, Michael was seated in Principal Delaney's office, declining coffee as the harried administrator settled behind her desk. Regina Delaney had been running Riverdale High for 15 years, her no-nonsense approach earning her respect, if not always affection, from students and parents alike. "Mr. Morrison," she began, folding her hands on the desk, "Officer Collins mentioned this concerns Tyler Wilson." "And his friends," Michael confirmed. "I believe one is named Jason. I don't know the third boy's name." "Jason Carter and Eli Ramirez," she supplied, her expression sharpening with concern. "Are they in some kind of trouble?" "They were," Michael replied evenly. "This morning at Simmons' grocery, they harassed and physically intimidated my father, a disabled veteran in a wheelchair. They've since apologized, and my father has arranged for them to volunteer at the VA hospital as amends." Principal Delaney's expression darkened. "I see. And you're here because I want to make sure they follow through," Michael stated simply. "And because I think there's an opportunity here that shouldn't be wasted." Delaney raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. "These boys lack perspective," Michael explained, leaning forward slightly. "They see a man in a wheelchair and think it's acceptable to mock his disability. They don't understand what that chair represents, the service, the sacrifice. And you want to teach them that lesson," Delaney surmised, studying him with increased interest. "I want to give them the chance to learn it for themselves," Michael corrected. "You have a senior project requirement, correct? Community service?" Delaney nodded slowly, beginning to see where he was heading. 20 hours minimum. Many students do more. "I'm proposing that these 3 boys complete their project at the VA hospital under the supervision of Eleanor Wright. Not just a Saturday or 2, a full commitment. Let them work with the veterans, hear their stories, understand what service means." Delaney considered this, tapping a pen against her desk thoughtfully. "That's not a punishment I can officially impose, without parental involvement and a disciplinary hearing. It's not meant as punishment," Michael replied. "It's an opportunity for education, one they're unlikely to get in a classroom. And if they refuse," Michael's expression remained neutral, "then I file a formal complaint about their behavior this morning. The store has security cameras. My father has medals for valor. 3 teenagers bullying a disabled veteran makes for a compelling narrative, especially in a military town like Riverdale." The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Not menacing, but matter-of-fact. Principal Delaney was no pushover, but she recognized both the validity of his concern and the potential public relations disaster if this incident became widely known. "I'll speak with the boys and their parents," she finally said. "Present this as the opportunity that it is. I suspect they'll agree it's in everyone's best interest." Michael nodded once, satisfied. "Thank you." As he rose to leave, Delaney asked, "You're home on leave, or back for good?" "Just visiting," Michael replied, "for now." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "You know, we're always looking for good coaches for our athletic programs, someone with your background. Well, these kids could use more positive male role models." Michael paused at the door, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. Before his composure returned, "I'll keep that in mind." He left the school as purposefully as he had arrived, mission accomplished, at least for now. The hardware store was his next stop. He hadn't lied about the leaking faucet, and then home to his father, where the more complex task of navigating their evolving relationship awaited. James Morrison's house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, a single-story ranch style that had been modified with ramps and widened doorways after his condition deteriorated. Michael pulled into the driveway, noting Eleanor's car was gone, and the porch light was on, despite the daylight, their old signal from his childhood that all was well inside. He gathered the supplies from the hardware store and approached the front door, using his key rather than ringing the bell. The house smelled of coffee and the lemon polish his father had always used on the wood furniture, a scent that instantly transported Michael back through years of deployments to the constant that had been this home, this man. "In the study," James called at the sound of the door. Michael found his father by the window, wheelchair positioned to catch the morning light, a book open in his lap. The study walls were lined with photographs, James in uniform through the decades. Michael's graduation from Bodess, both of them with Michael's mother before cancer took her 15 years ago. A history of service and family intertwined. "Hardware store run successful?" James asked, setting aside his book. "Got everything I need," Michael confirmed, depositing the bag by the door before taking a seat in the leather chair opposite. His father. "Eleanor, get you home okay?" James nodded, studying his son with the penetrating gaze that had made junior officers straighten their spines throughout his career. "Want to tell me where you really went?" Michael met his father's eyes steadily, had a conversation with the principal at Riverdale High about those boys from this morning. James's expression darkened. "I told you to let it go." "No," Michael corrected respectfully. "You told them you were giving them a second chance. I just made sure they'll take it. Not your call to make, son. With all due respect, Dad, it became my call when I walked into that store and saw you being treated like that." Michael's composure slipped slightly, a flash of the morning's anger breaking through. "If I'd been 2 minutes later, but you weren't," James cut him off firmly, "and I've been handling myself a lot longer than you've been around to step in." The tension between them thickened, neither man willing to back down, both driven by the same protective instinct aimed in opposite directions. It was an old impasse, made new by James's wheelchair and Michael's growing awareness of his father's mortality. Finally, Michael sighed, running a hand over his short hair. "I know you can handle yourself, that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" James challenged. Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The point is that chair doesn't define you, but it changes things. The point is that those kids needed to learn that lesson before they hurt someone who doesn't have a Navy SEAL son walking through the door. The point is," he hesitated, then finished quietly, "the point is, you're the only family I've got left, Dad." The raw honesty in this last statement landed between them, stripping away the layers of military stoicism both men typically maintained. James looked away first, gazing at the photographs on the wall, at the visual timeline of their shared journey. "What did you say to the principal?" he finally asked, his tone softened. "That the boys should complete their senior service project at the VA hospital, under Eleanor's supervision." Michael kept his response straightforward, factual. "They'll learn more there than they would picking up trash by the highway or painting fences." James considered this, then nodded slowly. "That's not a bad idea." "I have them occasionally," Michael replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. A tentative truce established, they lapsed into more comfortable silence, the kind that had sustained their relationship through years of deployments and brief reunions. Words had never been their primary language. They communicated through actions, through presence, through the unspoken understanding that each would move mountains for the other without hesitation. "Your knee bothering you?" James asked, after a while, nodding toward the way Michael had extended his right leg. "Just stiff," Michael deflected automatically. "Nothing serious." James raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "That the official prognosis, or your personal assessment?" Michael hesitated, weighing how much to share. His father had always had an uncanny ability to see through half-truths, a skill that had served him well as a commander and occasionally frustrated his son. "Took some shrapnel 3 months ago," he finally admitted. Medical cleared me, but it acts up sometimes. James nodded, accepting this explanation without pushing for details he knew might be classified. Eleanor might have something for that. She keeps the good stuff for her special cases. I'm fine, Dad, Michael insisted, the familiar refrain of military men who considered anything short of catastrophic injury to be a minor inconvenience. Sure you are, James replied dryly, just like I'm fine with this damn chair. He tapped the armrest for emphasis. Doesn't mean we can't use the help when it's offered. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of early autumn day that hinted at winter's approach without surrendering summer's warmth. The VA hospital's grounds were immaculate, the result of dedicated groundskeepers and volunteer efforts that maintained the flower beds and walking paths where veterans could find moments of peace amid their recovery journeys. Eleanor Wright arrived at 7:30 a.m., as she did every Saturday, clipboard in hand and determination in her stride. After 20 years in the Army Medical Corps, she approached volunteer coordination with the same precision she'd once applied to battlefield triage, assessing needs, allocating resources, and ensuring nothing fell through the cracks. She was reviewing the day's assignments when she spotted them, 3 teenage boys standing awkwardly by the hospital entrance, looking simultaneously defiant and terrified. Right on time. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile before approaching. "Wilson, Carter, and Ramirez," she called out, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had once commanded medical units in combat zones. The boys straightened instinctively, Tyler in the lead as always. "Yes, ma'am," he responded, making a visible effort to meet her eyes. Eleanor assessed them with a quick, practiced glance. The tall one, Tyler, seemed genuinely determined despite his nervousness. The stocky one, Jason, radiated reluctance and resentment. The third, Eli, appeared simply uncomfortable, eyes darting around as if mapping escape routes. "Follow me," she instructed, turning without waiting to see if they complied. The sharp click of her practical shoes on the hospital tiles provided a rhythm for their hesitant footsteps behind her. She led them to a small conference room where volunteer orientations were held, gesturing for them to sit while she remained, standing, clipboard at the ready. "Before we begin, let me be clear about something," she said, her voice level but intense. "This is not community service in the sense you're accustomed to. This is not picking up trash or washing cars. The men and women in this facility have given parts of themselves, physical, mental, emotional, in service to this country. Some sacrifices you can see." She tapped her own leg, where they now noticed the slight bulge of a prosthetic beneath her pants. "Others you cannot. All deserve your complete respect and attention. Is that understood?" The boys nodded, Jason's reluctance visibly diminishing as he registered Eleanor's prosthetic. "Good," she continued. "You'll be here every Saturday for the next 10 weeks, minimum 4 hours each session. You'll assist with whatever is needed, wheelchair transport, recreation activities, companionship. Some days will be challenging. Some patients may be difficult. That's not your concern. Your only job is to be helpful, respectful, and present. Questions?" Tyler raised his hand tentatively. Will we see Mr. Morrison here?" Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Master Chief Morrison visits on Tuesdays and Thursdays. His son sometimes accompanies him." She paused, studying Tyler's face. "But make no mistake, every veteran here deserves the same respect you should have shown him." Tyler nodded, flushing slightly. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor handed each boy a volunteer badge and a simple uniform shirt with the VA logo. "Put these on. We start in 5 minutes." As the door closed behind her, the boys exchanged nervous glances. "This is stupid," Jason muttered, reluctantly pulling the shirt over his head. "Principal Delaney said we could do a different project if we wanted. And have that SEAL come after us again? No thanks." Eli replied, shuddering slightly at the memory of Michael Morrison's cold, assessing stare. Tyler remained silent, adjusting his badge thoughtfully. He hadn't told his friends about the conversation he'd had with his mother after coming home from the grocery store, about how she'd cried when he confessed what he'd done, about how she'd shown him his grandfather's medals again, and explained what each one had cost. Some lessons ran deeper than fear of consequences. Eleanor's orientation proved to be brief but comprehensive, covering privacy regulations, safety protocols, and appropriate interactions. By 8:15 a.m., she was assigning them their first tasks. "Carter, you're with maintenance. They need help moving furniture for the new recreation room." She handed Jason off to a burly man with a tool belt who looked capable of ensuring compliance. Through physical presence alone. Ramirez, kitchen duty. They're preparing for a special lunch event. Eli disappeared toward the cafeteria, looking relieved to be assigned a familiar task. Eleanor turned to Tyler. "You're with me, Wilson." She led him through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and institutional food, past rooms where veterans of various ages and conditions rested, recovered, or simply existed in the aftermath of service and sacrifice. Some called out greetings to Eleanor, who responded to each by name, often with an inside joke or a question about family members. "Where are we going?" Tyler finally asked as they entered a quieter wing. "Recreation therapy," Eleanor replied. "We have a patient who needs a chess partner." She stopped outside a door marked with a small American flag sticker and knocked, gently before entering. The room was private, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the garden. A man sat in a wheelchair by the window, his back to the door, seemingly absorbed in watching birds at a feeder outside. "Good morning, Colonel," Eleanor said warmly. "I've brought you a chess partner today." The man's wheelchair turned slowly, revealing a face marked by severe burn scars across the right side. His right arm ended at the elbow, and a blanket covered his legs, though the shape beneath suggested at least one was missing. Despite these injuries, he radiated a quiet dignity, his left eye sharp and evaluating as it took in Tyler's nervous figure. "This is Tyler Wilson," Eleanor continued. "Tyler, meet Colonel David Mercer, United States Army, retired." Tyler stood frozen, uncertain how to react to the colonel's injuries. He'd seen wounded veterans in movies, of course, but the reality, the puckered skin, the missing limbs, was jarring in its intimacy. Colonel Mercer's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "First time seeing what an IED can do up close, son." Tyler swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Well, I've had worse days," the colonel replied matter-of-factly, "and better ones. Today's shaping up decently, assuming you know how to play chess." "I do, sir," Tyler said, grateful for the redirect. "My dad taught me." "Good man, you're—" "Father," the colonel nodded approvingly. "Pull up that chair. Eleanor's tired of letting me win." Eleanor rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "I never let you win, David. You're just better than me." She turned to Tyler. "I'll be back in an hour. The colonel likes black coffee if you need to refresh his cup." With that, she left Tyler alone with the scarred veteran, the chessboard. Between them, like a neutral territory where they might safely meet. Colonel Mercer was indeed good at chess, Tyler discovered, methodical, patient, and several moves ahead at all times. They played mostly in silence for the first game, which the colonel won handily, despite his physical limitations. As Tyler reset the pieces for a second match, he found himself asking, "How did it happen, sir? If you don't mind me asking?" The colonel considered him for a moment, as if weighing whether Tyler deserved his story. "Afghanistan, 2010. My vehicle hit an IED outside Kandahar. 2 of my men didn't make it home." Tyler nodded, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry," seemed inadequate. "Thank you for your service, too," formulaic. "Why are you here, Tyler Wilson?" the colonel asked suddenly, moving a pawn to open their second game. You're too young for community service hours to matter for college. Applications yet, and you don't strike me as the voluntarily selfless type. Tyler flushed, moving his own pawn with less confidence. I did something I'm not proud of. Most of us have, the colonel replied evenly. The question is what you do afterward. Something in his tone, neither condemning nor excusing, loosened the knot in Tyler's chest. I was cruel to someone I shouldn't have been, a veteran in a wheelchair. He kept his eyes on the chessboard, ashamed to meet the colonel's gaze. I thought it was funny at the time. Now I can't understand why. Colonel Mercer moved his bishop, capturing Tyler's knight. Empathy is a learned skill, son. Some come by it naturally, others need a harder lesson. He gestured to his own injuries with his remaining hand. I was an arrogant lieutenant once, thought I knew everything about leadership because I had the rank. Took losing half my body and 2 good men to teach me otherwise. How do you not? Tyler struggled to formulate his question. How are you not angry all the time? The colonel considered this as he studied the board. Who says I'm not? Anger's not the enemy, son. It's what you do with it that matters. I can be angry about what happened and still choose to live whatever life I have left with purpose. They played in silence for several moves, Tyler absorbing this perspective. Besides, the colonel added, as he maneuvered his queen into a threatening position, anger's exhausting, and it doesn't grow back limbs. He delivered this with such unexpected dry humor that Tyler found himself smiling despite the gravity of the subject. Checkmate in 3 moves, Colonel Mercer announced, pointing to the board. Tyler studied the position, seeing the trap he'd walked into. You're really good at this. Had practice. Not much else to do during the first year of recovery. The colonel reset the board one-handed with practiced efficiency. Now, tell me about this veteran you wronged. Name's Morrison, according to Eleanor. Tyler looked up, surprised. You know him. Riverdale's not that big, Colonel Mercer shrugged, and the military community's even smaller. James Morrison is a legend in certain circles. Silver Star recipient. Could have retired after his first injury, chose to serve another 15 years. From behind a desk instead. He fixed Tyler with his good eye. Not someone I'd choose to disrespect, even if I didn't know his son has dropped more hostiles than most small countries' military forces. Tyler blanched at this casual reference to Michael Morrison's lethal capabilities. His son was there. When I was being stupid. He didn't say a word, just stood there, and somehow that was worse than if he'd yelled or threatened us. The colonel nodded approvingly. That's the mark of real authority, son. When you have genuine power, you don't need to advertise it. He moved his first piece in their new game. Your move. As they continued playing, Tyler found himself relaxing, the initial shock of the colonel's injuries fading as the man's personality, wry, intelligent, uncompromising, emerged through their conversation. By the time Eleanor returned, they had played 3 games, the colonel winning all 3, and Tyler had heard stories about military life that textbooks and movies had never captured. The brotherhood, the boredom, the moments of transcendent purpose amid chaos. Time to rotate, Tyler, Eleanor announced. Colonel, don't forget your physical therapy at 11. Wouldn't dream of missing it, Eleanor, the colonel replied with exaggerated enthusiasm that suggested exactly the opposite. He extended his hand to Tyler. Good games, son. Come back next week if you're so inclined. I enjoy fresh victims. Tyler shook his hand carefully, no longer seeing just the scars, but the man behind them. I'd like that, sir. As Eleanor led him to his next assignment, helping in the library where veterans could research benefits or simply enjoy quiet reading, Tyler found himself thinking about Master Chief Morrison, about the tremor in his hand that now seemed less Like weakness and more like evidence of endurance. Across the hospital, Jason was discovering his own lessons. What had begun as grudging furniture moving had evolved into conversation with the maintenance supervisor, a former army engineer named Garcia who had lost both legs in Iraq. Despite his disabilities, Garcia moved with impressive efficiency using prosthetics, tools secured in a specially designed belt around his waist. "Hand me that screwdriver, kid," Garcia directed, pointing to a nearby toolbox as he balanced on one knee to examine a doorframe. Jason complied, watching with reluctant admiration as Garcia made the repair one-handed while maintaining his balance. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" Garcia asked absently, focused on his task. "All of this," Jason gestured vaguely. "Moving around, fixing things, not being a miserable, helpless cripple?" Garcia supplied bluntly, glancing up with a raised eyebrow. Jason flushed. "I didn't mean—" "Sure you did." Garcia cut him off, but without heat. "It's what most people think when they see the chair or the prosthetics. Thank God that's not me. Or I could never handle that." He finished the repair and straightened, towering over Jason despite the mechanical legs. "Truth is, you handle what life gives you, because the alternative is giving up. And giving up isn't an option when you've had men depending on you." He packed his tools with practiced efficiency. "Besides, what's the point of surviving if you're not going to live?" He tossed a paint roller to Jason. "Recreation room walls. Need a second coat. Let's go." In the kitchen, Eli was having his own revelation. Assigned to help prepare a special lunch for a unit reunion, he found himself working alongside a chef, missing 3 fingers on his right hand. Rather than hindering him, the chef had adapted his technique, handling knives with a precision that left Eli staring. "Problem?" the chef asked, noticing Eli's fixation on his hand. "No, sir," Eli replied quickly. "Just impressive knife skills." The chef grinned. "Should see me with all my digits. Was even better then." He demonstrated a rapid chopping technique. "Adapt and overcome, kid." Military motto, but works for everything. "Here, try this." He handed Eli a knife and guided him through proper technique, patient but exacting in his standards. By the end of the morning, Eli had mastered a basic brunoise cut and found unexpected satisfaction in the precision of kitchen work. "You've got a good eye," the chef commented as they plated the finished dishes. "Ever thought about culinary school?" Eli blinked, surprised. No one had ever suggested he had talent for anything specific before. "Not really. Think about it," the chef advised. "World needs good cooks as much as it needs good soldiers. Different kind of service, but service nonetheless." As noon approached, Eleanor gathered the 3 boys in the hospital lobby, assessing their conditions with a critical eye. All looked tired, but in different ways than when they'd arrived. Less the fatigue of unwilling participants and more the honest exhaustion of work that carried meaning. "Your shifts are done for today," she informed them. "Same time next week." "Yes, ma'am," they responded nearly in unison. As they turned to leave, Eleanor added, "Wilson, a moment." Tyler hung back as his friends continued toward the door. "Colonel Mercer asked if you'd be his regular chess partner on Saturdays," Eleanor said, watching Tyler's reaction carefully. "He doesn't make that request often." Tyler straightened slightly. "I'd be honored." Eleanor nodded, a hint of approval crossing her features. "Good. 8 o'clock sharp, then." As Tyler rejoined his friends outside, there was a subtle but unmistakable shift in their dynamic. The cocky swagger of their grocery store confrontation was gone, replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful energy. "That chef said I have talent," Eli shared as they walked toward the bus stop, "for cooking. Garcia's going to show me how to install drywall next week," Jason added, an unfamiliar note of enthusiasm in his voice. "Says it's good money if I want summer work." Tyler listened, nodding, his own thoughts still with the colonel and their chess games. "I think," he began, then paused, searching for words. "I think we were wrong, about a lot of things." His friends didn't argue. None of them noticed the silver truck parked across the street, or Michael Morrison watching their departure with calculating eyes. He'd promised his father he wouldn't interfere further, but promises didn't preclude observation. Satisfied with what he'd seen, he started the engine and pulled away, heading toward home. James Morrison was in the backyard when Michael returned, seated in his wheelchair beside a half-completed woodworking project. Despite his disability, he'd adapted his workshop with custom-height benches and specialized tools that accommodated his tremors. Today, he was sanding a small wooden box, the repetitive motion seeming to soothe rather than aggravate his condition. "How are they doing?" James asked without looking up, somehow knowing exactly where his son had been. Michael leaned against the workshop doorframe, arms crossed. "Better than expected." James nodded, focusing on a stubborn rough patch in the wood. "Eleanor's good at matching people to what they need to learn." The tall one, Tyler, was paired with David Mercer, Michael observed, watching his father's reaction. James's hands paused momentarily. "Interesting choice." "Effective one," Michael corrected. "Kid looked like he'd seen a ghost when he came out, but he was standing taller." James resumed his sanding, a faint smile touching his lips. "David has that effect on people." They lapsed into comfortable silence, the whisper of sandpaper, against wood the only sound. James had built this workshop himself years ago, before the wheelchair, when Michael was still a teenager, dreaming of following his father into service. The walls were lined with completed projects, bookshelves, rocking chairs, toys Michael had long outgrown, but his father had kept. "Hand me that finer grit, would you?" James requested, nodding toward a nearby shelf. Michael complied, studying the box as he did. "What are you making?" "Jewelry box," James replied, switching sandpapers. "For Eleanor's birthday next month." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know you and Eleanor were at the jewelry box stage." James shot him a look that would have quelled junior officers instantly. "We're not. She mentioned her grandmother's brooch needs a proper home. This is what friends do, son." "Of course," Michael agreed, straight-faced. "Friends." James muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like Navy smartass, but continued working. After a moment, he asked, "How's the knee today?" It was Michael's turn to look exasperated. "Functional." "That's not what I asked." Michael sighed, acknowledging defeat in this particular skirmish. "Stiff, aching. Eleanor's bringing some anti-inflammatory cream she swears by." James nodded, satisfied with this admission. "Good. Now make yourself useful and hand me that wood stain. The walnut, not the cherry." As they worked side by side, falling into the rhythm of a shared project, the earlier tension between them continued to ease. This was their most natural state, working together, each compensating for the other's limitations without comment or complaint. Words remained sparse, but communication flowed through the smooth exchange of tools, the adjustments made without asking, the occasional grunt of approval at a job well done. By late afternoon, the jewelry box was stained and ready for its first coat of finish. James surveyed their work with critical eyes before nodding once, the equivalent of effusive praise from anyone else. "Not bad," he conceded, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "We'll let that dry overnight." Michael helped clean up, restoring tools to their assigned places with military precision. As they finished, he noticed his father rubbing his left shoulder, the subtle grimace suggesting pain he wouldn't voluntarily acknowledge. "Spasms acting up?" Michael asked casually, careful not to sound concerned enough to trigger his father's pride. James grunted non-committally. "Nothing serious." Michael didn't push directly, knowing from long experience that frontal assaults against his father's stoicism were doomed to failure. Instead, he employed tactical flanking. "Thought I'd grill those steaks for dinner. You mind handling the salad? Gives those tremors something useful to do." James narrowed his eyes, recognizing the maneuver for what it was, but appreciating its subtlety nonetheless. "Trying to ensure I get my vegetables, son?" "Just dividing labor efficiently," Michael replied innocently. James snorted, but wheeled toward the house without argument. "Fine, but none of that fancy balsamic nonsense you brought last time. Good old ranch dressing in this house." "Yes, sir," Michael agreed, falling in behind his father as they headed inside. "Wouldn't dream of nutritional improvement." Their evening settled into comfortable routine. Steaks grilled to military precision, medium rare, exactly 145 degrees Fahrenheit. Salad grudgingly consumed, minimal but companionable conversation. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where James transferred himself from wheelchair to recliner with practiced ease, while Michael pretended not to hover nearby. The television played a baseball game neither particularly cared about, providing background noise as James paged through a woodworking magazine and Michael cleaned his service pistol at the dining table, a habit he maintained even on leave, the rhythmic disassembly and reassembly as natural as breathing. "Told your commanding officer today," James said casually, not looking up from his magazine. Michael's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their practiced movements. "That so?" Old friend from joint operations years back." James turned a page with deliberate nonchalance. "Mentioned you were considering transition options." The silence stretched between them, laden with unspoken questions. Michael finally set down the cleaning rod, giving his father his full attention. "And what did Commander Phillips have to say about that?" "Said it was above his clearance level," James replied dryly, "but that your medical review was scheduled for next week." More silence as Michael absorbed the implications of this conversation. His father rarely pulled strings or asked questions about his career, respecting the classified nature of much of his work and honoring the boundaries between their respective services. For him to make such a call suggested both concern and restraint in how he expressed it. "The knee's worse than I've let on," Michael finally admitted, his voice even. "Last deployment. There were complications. Infection, nerve damage." James nodded, still not looking up. "Figured as much. Medical's pushing for a training position, at least temporarily." Michael's tone remained neutral, but the cost of this admission was evident in the tension of his shoulders. "I haven't decided yet." James responded, turning another page. After a moment he added, "Principal Delaney mentioned they need a wrestling coach. Previous guy took a job in the city." Michael blinked, caught off guard by this apparent non sequitur. "Dad, just information." James cut him off mildly. "Do with it what you will." They lapsed back into silence, but something had shifted, an acknowledgement of change, of possibilities, neither had previously voiced. Michael returned to cleaning his weapon, movements precise and controlled. James continued reading, or at least pretending to. "I'm not ready to be done," Michael finally said, the words emerging with reluctance. "Not like this." James looked up then, meeting his son's eyes directly. "No one ever is, son, but sometimes the mission changes, doesn't mean it ends." 3 weeks passed, marking time in the quiet rhythms of Riverdale and the more structured cadence of the VA hospital's Saturday volunteer program. October had arrived in earnest, painting the town in amber and crimson as Michael Morrison's planned departure date approached. His medical review had been completed, the results still pending, leaving him in the familiar military limbo of waiting for others to determine his future. On this particular Saturday morning, Michael found himself driving toward the VA hospital. Rather than accompanying his father to the weekly veterans' breakfast, James had insisted he was perfectly capable of managing on his own. Been doing it for months before you showed up, son, and suggested Michael might want to observe the community service project he'd helped arrange. Just to see it through, James had said, in the tone that had once directed battalions and now directed his increasingly stubborn son. So Michael found himself pulling into the hospital parking lot just as Eleanor Wright was conducting her usual morning briefing for the 3 teenagers who had become familiar fixtures at the facility. From his vantage point in the car, he observed their transformation with professional assessment. Tyler Wilson's attentive posture as he took notes on Eleanor's instructions, Jason Carter's easy rapport with the maintenance supervisor as they reviewed blueprints for a new accessibility ramp, Eli Ramirez's confident handling of the meal delivery cart he was preparing to navigate through the hospital corridors. Eleanor spotted him first, raising a hand in acknowledgement before dispatching the boys to their assigned duties. She approached his vehicle as he stepped out, clipboard tucked under her arm in her characteristic fashion. "Commander," she greeted him, her tone neutral but not unwelcoming. "Come to check up on your rehabilitation project." Michael leaned against the car, arms crossed. "Just curious about their progress." Eleanor's expression softened into something approaching approval. "They've exceeded expectations, if I'm being honest. Wilson in particular. He's got a real connection with Colonel Mercer. Been helping him compile his memoirs for the Veterans History Project." Michael raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Mercer's finally writing them down. We've been trying to get him to do that for years. Sometimes the right listener makes all the difference," Eleanor observed. She hesitated, then added, "Your father's rubbing off on you, you know." "How's that?" "This," she gestured toward the hospital where the boys had disappeared to their duties, second chances, seeing potential where others might not. "It's very James Morrison." Michael absorbed this comparison with mixed emotions. Being likened to his father was both a lifelong aspiration and a complex standard to measure against. Before he could formulate a response, Eleanor continued, "Since you're here, you might as well make yourself useful," she decided, tearing a page from her clipboard and handing it to him. "The recreation room needs someone to help set up for the medal ceremony this afternoon. One of our Vietnam veterans is finally receiving his Silver Star. Paperwork mix-up had it delayed for nearly 50 years. Michael accepted the assignment without argument, recognizing Eleanor's authority in this domain as absolute as any military chain of command. "Yes, ma'am." She favored him with a rare smile. "Your father says the knee's improving." "Dad? It talks too much," Michael replied, but without heat. "He worries," Eleanor countered. "It's what fathers do." She checked her watch. "Recreation rooms down the east corridor. Ask for Specialist Jenkins if you need anything." With that, she strode off, already focused on her next task, leaving Michael to navigate the familiar hospital corridors. He'd spent more time here than most civilians, visiting wounded teammates over the years and more recently accompanying his father to various appointments. The institutional smell, the squeak of wheels on polished floors, the muted conversations, all formed a backdrop as familiar to military personnel as the sound of aircraft on a carrier deck or the rhythm of boots on a parade ground. The recreation room was spacious and sunlit, windows overlooking the garden where patients could enjoy controlled outdoor access during rehabilitation. Several volunteers were already arranging chairs in neat rows, preparing for the afternoon's ceremony. Michael reported to Specialist Jenkins, a compact woman with close-cropped grey hair, who immediately put him to work, hanging a large American flag as the backdrop for the presentation. As he secured the flag's corners, ensuring precise alignment, Michael found himself thinking about the medals his father kept in a simple wooden case at home. Not displayed prominently, not hidden away, simply present, like the service they represented. James Morrison had never sought recognition, had often seemed almost embarrassed by commendations, insisting he'd only done what anyone would do in the same circumstances. Michael knew better. Not everyone would have pulled 3 wounded Marines to safety under heavy fire in Kuwait. Not everyone would have returned to active duty after months of painful rehabilitation. Not everyone would have mentored generations of young officers, shaping the leadership culture of an entire branch of service through quiet example rather than dramatic gestures. His reflections were interrupted by a commotion at the doorway. As Tyler Wilson backed into the room, carefully maneuvering Colonel Mercer's wheelchair through the entrance. The colonel was dressed in his full army dress uniform, medals and ribbons precisely arranged across his chest, cap settled over his scarred features. Despite his missing limbs and burn injuries, he emanated military bearing, sitting as straight in his chair as any soldier at attention. "Ah, Commander Morrison," the colonel called, spotting Michael by the flag. "Eleanor said you might be here. Come help this young man get me positioned. Apparently, I'm part of the ceremony this afternoon." Michael crossed the room, offering a respectful nod to the colonel, before assisting Tyler in navigating the wheelchair to a reserved space in the front row. He noticed the ease with which Tyler handled the chair now, a far cry from the awkward, uncertain teenager of 3 weeks ago. "Colonel," Michael acknowledged, looking sharp. "Figured I'd remind these Navy types what a real soldier looks like," Mercer replied, with the good-natured inter-service rivalry that transcended rank and era. "Wilson here's been helping me with my memoirs. Boy's got a good ear for story." Tyler flushed slightly at the praise, but stood taller. "Just typing what you dictate, sir." "And asking the right questions," the colonel countered. "That's rarer than you'd think." He turned his attention back to Michael. "How's your father?" "Doing? Haven't seen him this week." "Managing," Michael replied, "stubborn as ever." Colonel Mercer laughed, a rough sound that suggested his lungs had suffered damage, along with his more visible injuries. "Pot, kettle, Commander, you Morrisons could give mules lessons in stubbornness." Tyler watched this exchange with evident fascination, witnessing the easy camaraderie between veterans of different services, ranks, and generations, the shorthand of shared experience that transcended conventional social boundaries. "Sir," Tyler interjected hesitantly, addressing Michael, "I never properly thanked you for what you did, or didn't do, I guess." Michael studied him, noting the genuine contrition in his expression. "Wasn't me who gave you the second chance, Wilson. That was my father." "Still," Tyler persisted, "you could have, I don't know, pressed charges or something. Instead, you got us here." He gestured around the hospital. "It's changed things, for all of us." Before Michael could respond, Colonel Mercer cut in. "That's how it works, son. One generation shapes the next, for better or worse." He fixed Tyler with his good eye. "Question is, what will you do with the shaping you've received?" Tyler considered this with unexpected seriousness. "I've been thinking about that, sir. A lot." He straightened as if coming to attention. "I'd like to apply to West Point after graduation." The colonel's scarred eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Military ambitions, Wilson? That's a significant shift from 3 weeks ago." "Yes, sir," Tyler acknowledged. "I know it won't be easy. My grades are okay, not great. But I've been researching the requirements, and I'm willing to put in the work." Michael observed this declaration with professional assessment, looking beyond the easy enthusiasm of youth for signs of genuine commitment. What he saw impressed him, not a romanticized notion of heroism, but the beginning of a realistic understanding of service. "West Point's no joke," he said finally. "Neither is any service academy, or officer candidate school for that matter." "I know, sir," Tyler replied. "Colonel Mercer's been very clear about the realities." The colonel chuckled. "Been trying to talk him out of it, actually. Told him all my worst war stories. Boys either remarkably dedicated or remarkably stubborn." "Probably both," Michael commented, finding himself oddly invested in this unexpected development. You'll need congressional nomination, strong academic record, physical fitness standards. Tyler nodded, producing a small notebook from his pocket. I've made a list, been working on a training. Plan 2. Michael and Colonel Mercer exchanged glances, a silent communication between military men recognizing the first stirrings of the same calling that had shaped their own lives. I might know some people who could help with the physical training aspects, Michael said carefully, not quite committing but opening a door. If you're serious. I am, sir, Tyler responded with quiet certainty. The moment was interrupted as Eleanor appeared in the doorway, clipboard raised like a battle standard. Ceremonies in 1 hour, gentlemen. Commander Morrison, we need those chairs arranged in precise rows, not casual conversation circles. The 3 parted ways, Colonel Mercer to prepare his remarks as a presenter, Tyler to assist other patients arriving for the ceremony, and Michael to the task of chair arrangement, which he approached with the same tactical precision he'd once applied to mission planning. As he worked, he found himself thinking about Tyler's unexpected ambition. The boy had entered the VA hospital program as a form of punishment, of making amends. Somewhere along the way, it had transformed into something else, a calling perhaps, or at least the first recognition that service might offer something meaningful beyond self-interest. It reminded Michael of his own journey, beginning with childhood admiration of his father's uniform and medals, evolving through the harsh realities of training and combat into a deeper understanding of what service truly meant. Not glory or adventure, but purpose, contribution, being part of something larger than oneself. The ceremony itself was both simple and profound. An elderly Vietnam veteran, bent with age but standing as straight as his body allowed, receiving the Silver Star he'd earned during the Tet Offensive, surrounded by fellow veterans and community members who understood the significance of this long-delayed recognition. The medal was presented by Colonel Mercer, himself a Silver Star recipient, the moment bridging generations of service and sacrifice. Michael observed from the back of the room, professional detachment gradually giving way to unexpected emotion. As he watched the old veteran's face, the pride, the grief, the complicated mix of feelings that accompanied any reminder of combat experiences, he recognized that same complexity in his father, in himself, in every service member who had faced the fundamental paradox of military life, training for conflict while hoping for peace. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled over coffee and modest refreshments, Michael found himself approached by Principal Delaney, who had attended as a community representative. "Commander Morrison," she greeted him, extending her hand. "I was hoping I might find you here." Michael shook her hand, immediately alert to the purposeful look in her eyes. "Principal Delaney, here for the ceremony?" "Partially," she acknowledged, "but I was also hoping to continue our previous conversation." She nodded toward Tyler, who was assisting an elderly veteran with his coffee across the room. "Your rehabilitation project seems to be working." "Not my project," Michael corrected automatically, "but yes, they seem to be finding their way." "Particularly Wilson," she observed. "His teachers report significant improvement in his focus and academic effort. He's apparently set his sights on West Point." Michael nodded, neither confirming nor denying his knowledge of this development. "Which brings me back to our earlier discussion," Principal Delaney continued. "We still need that wrestling coach and possibly a physical education teacher for next semester. The school board has approved a new elective, Introduction to Military Service, covering basics of all branches, fitness requirements, career paths." She paused, letting this sink in. "We need someone with actual experience to develop and teach it." Michael maintained his neutral expression despite the sudden rapid calculation occurring behind it. "That's a very specific curriculum for a very specific need," she countered. "Riverdale sends a higher percentage of graduates to military service than most communities. They should be properly prepared." She handed him a business card. "Think about it, Commander. The position would be available when you're ready." As she walked away, Michael turned the card over in his fingers, considering possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to contemplate seriously until now. His medical review results were still pending, but the doctor's informal comments had made the likely outcome clear: limited duty at minimum, possible medical retirement if the nerve damage in his knee continued to progress. He pocketed the card and moved toward the exit, his task here complete. As he passed through the recreation room doors, he nearly collided with a wheelchair being maneuvered by an apologetic nurse. "Sorry, sir," she said, adjusting her course. "Mr. Morrison insisted on attending, even though he's not normally here on Saturdays." Michael looked down to find his father gazing up at him with a mixture of amusement and challenge. "Dad, thought you were at breakfast." "Finished early," James replied casually. "Heard about the medal ceremony. Figured I should pay my respects." He dismissed the nurse with a nod of thanks before turning back to his son. "Interesting proposal from Principal Delaney." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You heard that?" "I hear most things," James replied cryptically. "Side effect of people assuming wheelchairs affect hearing." He gestured toward a quieter alcove off the main corridor. "Got a minute?" Michael followed as his father wheeled himself to the more private space, positioning his chair to face his son directly. "Something on your mind, Dad?" James studied him with the penetrating gaze that had evaluated countless Marines under his command. "That boy, Tyler, he's serious about West Point." "Seems to be," Michael confirmed. "Colonel Mercer thinks he's got potential." James nodded thoughtfully. "David's judgment is usually sound." He paused, then continued with uncharacteristic directness. "You're considering Delaney's offer." It wasn't a question, but Michael answered anyway. "Considering, not deciding, but leaning." Michael sighed, recognizing the futility of evasion. "Medical's going to sideline me, Dad. We both know it. Question is just for how long. And whether you fight it," James added perceptively. "There's nothing to fight," Michael replied, a hint of frustration breaking through his controlled demeanor. "The knee's damaged, nerves don't regenerate. Best case scenario, I get a training position at Little Creek or Coronado, teaching younger guys to do what I can't anymore." James absorbed this with the stoicism of someone intimately familiar with such reckonings. "And that's so different from teaching at Riverdale High because—" Michael started to respond, then stopped, recognizing the trap his father had laid. "It's not the same." "No," James agreed, surprisingly. "It's potentially more impactful." He gestured toward the hospital around them. How many of these men and women would have benefited from better preparation before enlisting? How many might have made different choices about their service paths with proper guidance? Michael considered this perspective, seeing the situation through his father's experienced eyes rather than through the lens of his own disappointment. "When I first got this chair," James continued, tapping the armrest for emphasis, "I thought it was the end of usefulness, of purpose." He looked up, meeting his son's gaze directly. "I was wrong. The mission changed, but it didn't end." Michael recognized his own words from weeks earlier, now reflected back to him with the added weight of his father's lived experience. "I'm not ready to be done," he admitted quietly. "No one ever is," James replied, echoing their previous conversation. "But sometimes the greatest service isn't on the battlefield. Sometimes it's in preparing the next generation to face theirs." Before Michael could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Tyler, slightly out of breath from hurrying down the corridor. "Commander Morrison, sir." "Oh, Master Chief Morrison." He straightened respectfully, addressing both men. "Colonel Mercer was asking if you'd both join him." They're taking photos with the Silver Star recipient, and he said it would mean a lot to have representatives from different branches. Father and son exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication born of shared blood and shared service. "We'd be honored," James replied, already turning his wheelchair toward the recreation room. "Lead the way, Wilson." As they followed Tyler back toward the ceremony, Michael found himself walking beside his father's chair with a new awareness. Not following, not leading, but accompanying, each in their own way, at their own pace, toward a common purpose. The recreation room had been rearranged, chairs pushed back to create a space where the elderly Silver Star recipient stood surrounded by fellow veterans. Colonel Mercer in his wheelchair, several VA patients with various visible injuries, and a few active duty personnel who had attended in uniform. A photographer from the local newspaper was attempting to organize them into a cohesive group with limited success. "Ah, the Morrisons," Colonel Mercer called as they entered. "Navy and Marines, just what we need to complete the set. Get over here." As they joined the group, Michael found himself positioned between his father's wheelchair and Tyler, who stood somewhat awkwardly at the edge, uncertain of his place in this gathering of service members. "Wilson," Colonel Mercer beckoned. "You, too, future cadet, deserves a spot." Tyler's eyes widened at this public acknowledgement of his aspirations, but he stepped forward, standing at a natural approximation of attention that made James nod approvingly. The photographer arranged them in a semicircle, the Silver Star recipient at center, flanked by veterans of different eras, services, and physical conditions. What might have seemed a disparate collection of individuals was unified by an invisible thread of shared commitment, some at the beginning of their journey, some in the middle, some nearing its end, but all connected by the choice to serve, something beyond themselves. As the camera captured the moment, Michael found his hand resting lightly on his father's shoulder, a point of connection that acknowledged both James's influence on his path and his own emerging role in guiding others toward theirs. His other hand gave Tyler a brief, encouraging squeeze on the shoulder, not quite a blessing, but a recognition of potential, of possibility. "Quite a picture," James observed quietly as the photographer finished. "Past, present, and future, all in one frame." Michael nodded, seeing the pattern his father had identified, the continuum of service that stretched backward through generations and forward into uncertain but hopeful futures. His knee ached from standing, a physical reminder of limitations that now seemed less defining than they had weeks ago. As the group dispersed, Colonel Mercer maneuvered his wheelchair alongside James's, the two disabled veterans moving with the synchronized precision of those accustomed to navigating the world on wheels. "Morrison," Mercer addressed James, "that boy of yours made any decisions about Delaney's offer?" James glanced up at Michael, who was engaged in conversation with the Silver Star recipient a few feet away. "Not officially, but he's coming around." Mercer nodded approvingly. "Good. Town could use someone like him shaping the next generation. Too many of these kids have no idea what service really means." "He'll figure it out," James replied with quiet confidence. "Sometimes the hardest part is accepting when one mission ends and another begins." "Isn't that the truth?" Mercer agreed ruefully, gesturing to his missing limbs. "Took me 2 years of feeling sorry for myself before I found my next purpose." James's expression softened with understanding. "Worth the wait, though." "Every damn day," Mercer confirmed. He nodded toward Tyler, who was listening intently as Michael explained something about military protocols. "That one's gonna make it, I think. Got the right balance of confidence and humility now." "Amazing what can change in 3 weeks," James observed. "And what doesn't," Mercer added pointedly, glancing between James and Michael. "Some things run in the blood, Morrison. That son of yours is you all over again, just with better training and worse jokes. James laughed, a genuine sound rarely heard in recent months. Don't tell him that. His ego's big enough already. As the afternoon progressed, the ceremony concluded and attendees gradually departed. Michael found himself walking beside his father's wheelchair toward the parking lot, Tyler a few steps behind, after helping Colonel Mercer back to his room. "Commander Morrison," Tyler called, jogging to catch up. "Sir, I wanted to ask if you're going to be in town a while longer."
Ooh.
Colonel Mercer mentioned you might be able to help with physical training for West Point preparation. Michael slowed, allowing his father to continue ahead to give them a moment of privacy. "You're serious about this path, Wilson?" "Yes, sir," Tyler replied without hesitation. "More than I've been about anything." Michael studied him, seeing beyond the eager teenager to the potential officer he might become with proper guidance. It's not an easy road. Physically, mentally, emotionally, it will demand everything you have and then ask for more. "I understand, sir." "No," Michael corrected him gently. "You don't, not yet. But you're willing to learn, and that's a start." He glanced toward his father, who was pretending not to eavesdrop as he transferred himself from wheelchair to the adapted van's driver's seat with practiced efficiency. "Running track at the high school tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Don't be late." Tyler's face lit up with surprised gratitude. "I won't be, sir, thank you." As the boy hurried away, Michael joined his father at the van, sliding into the passenger seat without comment. 6 a.m. on a Sunday, James observed as he started the engine. "Cruel and unusual punishment. Standard SEAL training technique," Michael replied with a hint of a smile. "Separate the committed from the merely interested right from the start." They drove in companionable silence for several minutes before James spoke again. "You're taking Delaney's offer." It wasn't a question this time, but a recognition of a decision already made, perhaps before Michael himself had fully acknowledged it. "Seems like I am," Michael confirmed, watching the familiar streets of Riverdale pass by his window. "At least until medical clears me for full duty." He paused, then added with newfound honesty, "If they clear me." James nodded, accepting this without pushing further. Town could do worse than having a Morrison shaping its young people. "Town already has a Morrison doing that," Michael pointed out. "Those veterans' breakfasts, the VA volunteering program, you've been mentoring half the town for years." James waved this off, but the slight straightening of his shoulders suggested the observation had landed. "Different kind of influence." "Same core mission," Michael countered, "just different tactics." As they turned onto their street, the familiar outline of home coming into view, James slowed the van, uncharacteristic hesitation in his normally decisive driving. "That woodshop of mine," he said finally, "could use a second set of hands for some of the larger projects. If you're going to be around." Michael recognized the invitation for what it was, not just shared work, but shared purpose. A partnership, rather than the caretaking his father so fiercely resisted. "I'd like that," he replied simply. The van resumed its progress toward home, carrying 2 generations of service bound by blood, experience, and now a new understanding of how missions evolve but never truly end when the cause remains worthy and the heart remains willing. Because some uniforms are worn on the soul long after the physical ones are set aside, and some commands are given not through rank or authority, but through the quiet power of example that speaks volumes about courage, adaptation, and the unbreakable bonds of those who choose to serve in whatever form that service may take. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you believe in second chances and the power of example to change lives. See you next time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.